I always thought I was more prepared for adulthood than I turned out to be. At 25, I considered myself independent, responsible, and focused on my career as a graphic designer in Seattle. I knew I could handle client deadlines, renovate my tiny apartment, and manage my student loans without breaking a sweat. What I didn't anticipate was my dad's phone call last Tuesday afternoon. That changed everything in a single sentence. Dad called just as I was about to leave my office. After a long day, I remember staring at my computer screen, my fingers hovering over the mouse. Thinking about grabbing coffee with friends later that evening, the ringtone made me jump. My chest tightened when I saw his name on the screen. I answered casually. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" His voice sounded oddly calm, void of his usual teasing tone. He got straight to the point. "Julia, I need you to handle something for me. It's for close family." He paused, then added, "I trust you to take care of it." Before I could ask what he meant, he hung up. My heart pounded as I stared at my phone, uncertain what I had just agreed to. I tried calling him back immediately, but he didn't pick up. I sent a text asking for details. No response. Panic set in. My mind raced through every scenario. Was he in debt? Was someone sick? Did he lose his job? I felt my pulse quicken. I took a deep breath and decided I would go to his house after work. It was only a few blocks away, our old family home near Green Lake, the place that held every childhood memory of scraped knees and backyard barbecues. In the taxi ride, I rehearsed questions and tried to calm myself. The air was cool and damp from an afternoon drizzle. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, giving the city a soft glow that did little to soothe the knot in my stomach. When I arrived, the front door was ajar. I called out, "Dad?" The hallway smelled of pine cleaner and the faint trace of his aftershave. I followed the scent into the living room, where I found him seated in his faded green armchair. He was holding a glossy brochure printed with photographs of perfectly manicured lawns, dotted with headstones. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was looking at: a cemetery catalog. I sank onto the edge of the couch and asked in a quiet voice, "What's going on, Dad?" He closed the brochure and set it gently on the coffee table, his hands lingering on the glossy pages. "I'm sorry I worried you," he said, his voice soft. "I've been thinking about the future, Julia. I want to make sure everything is ready for close family." My throat tightened. He reached for a mug of lukewarm coffee on the side table but paused before bringing it to his lips. His eyes were distant, haunted with a seriousness I had never seen before. Ominous realization is not an overstatement. My pulse hammered as I whispered, "Dad, what are you saying?" He looked at me, blinking back tears. "I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer 2 months ago," he said, each word slow and deliberate. "I didn't tell anyone until I knew more. The tests came back positive. I start chemotherapy next week." His voice remained steady, but I saw the vulnerability in his gaze. I remembered my aunt's struggle 6 years ago, the hospital visits, the chemotherapy side effects, the way her once vibrant laughter faded into whispers. Tears stung my eyes as I reached for his hand. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I choked out. He squeezed my hand gently. "I didn't want to scare you or burden you. I've already arranged everything medical. But there's one more thing I need you to do." He pointed to the brochure. "I want you to purchase a family plot and headstone now. While I can still choose the design and inscription, I want a place for our close family to gather one day, a place of peace." He looked at me with a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. "It's expensive and complicated. I need you to handle it." My mind whirled. The brochure listed plots starting at $8,000, plus engraving fees and perpetual care charges that could double the cost. It was more than I had in my savings account. Yet I felt a surge of protectiveness and love. I had to do this. "Dad, I'll handle it," I said, my voice cracking. "I'll pay for everything." Relief washed over his face in a way that broke my heart. He exhaled and managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Jules," he whispered, using my childhood nickname. "It means more than you know." That evening, I sat at my small dining table with my laptop open to the cemetery's website. The sky outside had darkened and a steady rain tapped against the window. I filled out the online forms, entered my credit card information, and watched the total amount climb. I paused before clicking submit, thinking of my brother Michael in Denver, my stepsister Anna in Portland, and my mother living 5 hours away. I thought of how shocked they'd be, how much they might resent me for paying such a huge sum without consulting them. My finger trembled, but I clicked. A confirmation email appeared in my inbox within seconds. I printed the confirmation page, folded the papers carefully, and slid them into a manila envelope with a trembling hand. I addressed it to my siblings, leaving it unopened on the kitchen counter. I couldn't bear to tell them the news by text or email. They needed Dad's voice, his explanation. I choked back tears as I sealed the envelope. The soft click of the flap felt heavy with finality. Later that night, I collapsed onto my couch, where my roommate Emma greeted me with a concerned look. "Julia, you look like you've been crying," she said, handing me a mug of tea. I stared at the envelope on the coffee table. "Dad asked me to handle something for close family," I whispered. Emma's brow furrowed. She broke the seal and opened it, scanning the pages. "You paid for a headstone?" she asked, incredulous. I nodded and wrapped my arms around myself. Emma pulled me into a hug. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "No, I had to do it. He needs this." The next morning, I tried to focus on work, but every time I opened a design file, my mind drifted back to the cemetery plot. I wondered how Dad felt now that the arrangements were official. I wondered when he would tell Michael and Anna. I worried they wouldn't understand why I fronted the entire cost. Anxiety gnawed at me through the morning hours. Finally, I texted Michael, "We need to talk later, urgent." He replied with a quick okay. At lunch, I walked along Lake Union, the water glistening under a sky that was turning lighter as the rain stopped. I reached into my bag and touched the envelopes. Crisp edges. I closed my eyes and took a long, steadying breath. This was what Dad wanted. He had trusted me to take care of it. Now it was up to the rest of our family to figure out how they would handle their share financially and emotionally. I slid the envelope back into my bag and continued down the path, feeling the weight of secret responsibility loosen just a little. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew I had taken the first step toward protecting the people I loved most. That afternoon, I called Michael on my phone as I walked along the sidewalk near Lake Union Park. He sounded tired but agreed to talk when I could explain in person. We met at a small cafe in Fremont, its walls painted bright murals of mythical creatures in bold color. The rain had stopped but the air remained damp, and my hair frizzed around my face. I slid into the booth across from him, my hands trembling as I set the manila envelope between us. He frowned and looked at me expectantly. I took a deep breath and told him everything my dad had asked. Michael's expression turned from confusion to disbelief. He leaned back, his coffee sloshing in the cup. "You paid for Dad's plot without telling anyone?" he asked, voice rising just slightly. I nodded, my throat tight. I explained how Dad had trusted me to handle it, how I'd clicked submit before I even thought twice. "You know how much that cost, right?" he said, reaching for the confirmation printout. I watched his face as he read the numbers and the cemetery's contact information. He laced his fingers through his curls and sighed heavily. I felt tears well up in my eyes. "Why? Didn't he tell me himself?" Michael asked softly, eyes downcast. I shrugged, voice cracking. "He didn't want to worry us. He said it was for close family and that he trusted me." Michael ran his hand over the table. Closing his eyes, the cafe's ambient music faded into the background as I watched him wrestle with anger and sadness. He finally looked up, shoulders slumped. "We need to tell Anna and Mom," he said, tone flat. I nodded miserably. That evening, I organized a group video call with Mom, Anna, Michael, and myself. They appeared in separate windows, their faces lit by screens in dark rooms. Mom's eyes were red from crying. Anna looked shocked, covering her mouth with her hand. I held up the envelope and briefly summarized Dad's diagnosis and request. Silence followed as each of them absorbed the news. Mom wiped her nose and spoke first, voice wavering. "I'm so proud of you, Julia, for taking care of this," she said. Anna's voice trembled as she whispered, "But why wasn't I included in the decision?" Michael spoke up next, in a gentle tone of understanding, trying to bridge the silence. Anna's eyes narrowed, and she glared at me through the screen. "You couldn't even consult me on something this huge," she shouted. My heart clenched at her tone. I tried to explain that time was short, that Dad needed it done quickly. But Anna's frustration boiled over. "This affects all of us. It's not just your decision to make." Michael stepped in to calm her. "Anna, we'll figure out splitting the cost." She shook her head, tears falling freely at last. "I just feel like I'm losing him already." After the call ended, I sat in the darkened living room, hugging my knees to my chest. Rain began tapping on the window again, matching the rhythm of my heart. I felt guilty for acting without consulting Anna, yet proud that I'd honored Dad's wishes. I remembered how he used to guide me through every tough decision. Now he was asking me to carry this alone. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to cry, tears tumbling down my cheeks. I felt broken deeply. I couldn't see the future beyond Dad's illness, but I knew I had to keep going. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery office located on a quiet street in Ballard, the area still damp with the previous night's rain. The building was small, with stone columns framing its entrance and potted ferns flanking the double doors. I walked inside, clutching my umbrella and the printed confirmation pages. A receptionist greeted me with a warm smile and called the consultant, Mr. Thompson. From his office, he appeared moments later, tall and gentle-eyed, extending his hand. We settled into his office, sunlight filtering through stained glass windows. I spread out the cemetery brochure, blueprints, and photographs on his desk. He explained the plot's location beside a row of evergreen trees and described the headstone options. I listened as he showed me sketches of headstone designs, classic arches, simple rectangles, and a curved top with sculpted floral motifs. My fingers traced the lines on a digital render displayed on his tablet. He described the engraving fonts, the inscription layouts, and the option for a small bronze plaque with my dad's favorite quote. I hesitated at the price for the floral motif, but then remembered Dad's affinity for roses in our garden. "Let's go with this design," I said, pointing at the curved top stone engraved with delicate rose vines. Mr. Thompson nodded and began filling out the purchase order. I felt a lump in my throat as I signed the documents, legally committing to the cost. We scheduled a time for Dad to visit the model stones and choose a final inscription in person. I arrived at the cemetery office early the next morning, the humid July air clinging to my skin as I stepped out of my car. Dad was already waiting by the wrought iron gate, leaning on his cane. His usual stoic expression softened when he saw me. We exchanged a quick, awkward hug before following Mr. Thompson down a gravel path lined with lavender and white peonies. The fragrant blooms contrasted starkly with the rows of headstones beyond, reminding me of life and loss coexisting in the same space. Mr. Thompson led us to a display courtyard where sample headstones stood on pedestals. Dad ran his fingers over the smooth granite surface of a curved top design, etched with delicate rose vines. He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaled, and opened them to smile at me. "This one," he said quietly. His voice was firmer than I expected. I felt a lump in my throat, both proud and heartbroken at his resolve. We moved to an elegant drafting table under a pergola entwined with wisteria. Dad pulled out a small notebook and flipped to a blank page. He asked for a simple inscription, his name, birth and diagnosis dates, and beloved father and friend. He hesitated, then added a quote from Robert Frost. "In 3 words I can sum up everything I've learned about life," it goes on. His hand shook slightly as he recited it. I watched the consultant type each letter, the phrase etched into digital stone before our eyes. After the appointment, Dad and I sat in the cemetery's small chapel, wooden pews polished to a warm glow. I handed him a bottle of water and we sat in companionable silence. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for doing this, Jules." His eyes glistened. I squeezed his shoulder. "We're family. We take care of each other." His vulnerability hit me anew. He nodded and looked out the stained glass window at the cemetery grounds, where a single robin hopped between gravestones. Later, I drove home through the quiet Ballard streets, my thoughts a jumble of gravel paths and carved letters. I called Michael and Anna to update them. Michael was calmer than I'd expected, offering to cover my share of the cost immediately. Anna thanked me but asked if perhaps Mom could pay part too. We agreed to discuss the finances at our next family dinner. The call ended on a note of reluctant unity, easing the tension between us just a fraction when I walked into the office. The following Monday, my coworkers greeted me with concerned looks. I'd missed 2 days of deadlines between arranging cemetery details and family phone calls. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and dove into my work backlog. Between color proofs and logo revisions, I found myself drafting an email to my boss explaining my situation in vague terms, family medical emergency. She replied with support and extra time on my projects, reminding me to take care of myself. That afternoon, Dad's chemotherapy began. The oncology center smelled of antiseptic and cherry-flavored lip balm. Dad sat in a reclining chair beside a large window overlooking a courtyard garden. He wore his baseball cap low, and I noticed the faint stubble where his hair had begun to fall out. I held his hand as the nurse inserted the IV line. His grip tightened and he mustered a brave grin. "Ready to get radioactive?" he joked, trying to lighten the mood. I chuckled shakily, blinking back tears. The hum of the infusion pump filled the silent room as Dad closed his eyes. I watched the shadows move across his face, feeling helpless. When the nurse stepped out, I talked to him about our childhood road trips, the time we got lost on Highway 101. How he taught me to change a tire at 16. He listened, his breathing steady. For a moment, I saw him as the carefree man I remembered before illness tempered his spirit. In the weeks that followed, I balanced my full-time design job with driving Dad to treatments, cooking easy meals he could stomach, and fielding calls from concerned relatives. My apartment became a revolving door of dog-eared medical bills and half-finished drafts for client presentations. I learned to draft in my head while waiting in infusion lounges, texting art direction notes between chemo cycles. It was exhausting, but every time Dad squeezed my hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Emma, My roommate took over grocery runs and insisted I join her for yoga once a week. The instructor's calm voice and the stretch of my muscles reminded me that I was more than Dad's caretaker. One evening after class, Emma handed me a lavender-scented eye pillow. "You need to rest," she said. I leaned into her hug, grateful. It was the first time in weeks I let myself exhale. One rainy Thursday, Anna surprised me by showing up at the hospital unannounced. She carried a bouquet of yellow daisies, Dad's favorite. I had been in the cafeteria grabbing coffee when I spotted her across the room. We embraced tightly and I led her back to Dad's room, seeing her by his side. Offering him a gentle pat on the arm melted the last of my guilt. She apologized for her earlier anger, admitting she'd felt helpless. We promised to share the load from then on. That weekend, the four of us, Mom, Anna, Michael, and I, met at Mom's house in Bellevue. We spread out hand-drawn maps of the cemetery plot, discussed the payment schedule, and drafted a card for Dad. It was strange and wonderful to plan something so grim together, united in love. We laughed through tears as we chose his favorite blue paint for the inscription, and debated whether to add a bronze rose medallion. Just as optimism settled in, I received an email from the cemetery. Due to increased granite shortages, the headstone cost had gone up by 15%. My heart sank. I called Mr. Thompson, who offered to grandfather our original quote if we agreed to sign a waiver by week's end. I rallied my siblings by text, and Michael wire transferred the additional funds within hours. The relief was immediate but left me hollow at the financial burden we all carried. 2 days later, Dad had a particularly rough round of chemo. He slept most of the afternoon, his skin clammy and pale. I sat beside him, adjusting his blanket, and whispered stories about the headstone's progress, how the engraver had carved the frost quote by hand, how the rose motif would arch above his name. I watched his chest rise and fall, feeling the fragility of each breath. That evening, after Dad finally drifted into a deeper sleep, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky was a tapestry of bruised purples and soft gold as the sun dipped below the horizon. I closed my eyes, inhaled the humid air, and pressed my palm to the wooden railing. I thought of the path ahead, finishing Dad's treatment, unveiling his headstone with the family beside him, and finding my own way back to normalcy. As darkness settled, I returned inside and checked my phone. A text from Mr. Thompson asking if I could review the final engraving mock-up tomorrow at 10. My heart ached with anticipation and fear. Tomorrow, Dad would see his own memorial take shape. Tomorrow, I would face the reality of life's impermanence with those I loved most. I took a shaky breath, braced my trembling hands on the kitchen counter, and whispered into the quiet apartment, "We're ready."